A bark of laughter escaped him, rich and genuine. "You didn't." "I most certainly did. You should have seen him turn purple." She dusted flour from her hands, suddenly serious. "Kestrel, I need you to know I don't care what they say about us. But if staying here is making your life more difficult... He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "Magnolia, I've been called savage, heathen, and heartless for most of my life. Their words cannot hurt me." His thumbs traced small circles on her arms through the fabric of her dress. "But I worry about you. You were respected here before I came." "Respected and lonely," she said softly. "I'd rather have their disapproval and your company than their approval and an empty house." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known." "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of pretending to be someone I'm not to please people who wouldn't cross the street to help me if I were dying." "That is the definition of bravery," he said, his voice dropping to that deep rumble that made her stomach flutter. "Standing up for what you believe, regardless of the cost." They were standing very close now, closer than the bounds of propriety would allow. Magnolia could feel the heat radiating from his body, could count each individual eyelash framing those intense dark eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. "Kestrel," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that his name felt right on her lips. "I should go," he said, but made no move to step away. "People are already talking." "Let them talk." She reached up, her fingertips tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I'm tired of living my life according to other people's rules." He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his cheek. "You don't understand what you're asking. If we... if this becomes more than shared meals and polite conversation, there will be no going back. The town will never forgive you." "The town can go hang," she said fiercely. "I've spent my whole life being the good girl, the proper lady, the dutiful daughter. Where has it gotten me? 24 years old and alone, with nothing but gossip and judgment for company." His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "And what about me? What happens when you realize that I am not the man you think I am? When the novelty wears off and you see only what they see, a savage who doesn't belong in your world?" "You belong wherever you choose to be," she said, covering his hand with both of hers. "And I've seen who you are, Kestrel. You think I haven't noticed how you leave extra firewood for Mrs. Patterson, the widow with 6 children? How you fixed the Jamesons' roof after that storm, refusing payment? You're not the heartless savage they claim you are." His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and she could feel his internal struggle in the tension of his body. "Magnolia... Stay," she whispered, "not as a boarder, not as my hired hand. Stay as... whatever this is between us." The words hung in the air between them, a bridge across the chasm of uncertainty. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, promising another day of whispers and scandalized looks. But inside the warm kitchen, with Kestrel's hands cradling her face like she was something precious, Magnolia felt like she was finally, truly alive. The storm hit Millbrook Valley with unprecedented fury, turning the usually peaceful settlement into a battleground against nature's wrath. Magnolia stood at her kitchen window, watching sheets of rain lash against the glass while wind howled around the boarding house like a living thing. The storm had been raging for 2 days, and she was growing concerned about the rising creek that ran behind the town. "The water's still rising," she called to Kestrel, who was securing loose shutters on the far side of the room. "I've never seen Willow Creek this high." He finished hammering the last shutter and moved to stand beside her. Through the rain-streaked glass, they could see the normally placid creek had become a rushing torrent, carrying debris and threatening to overflow its banks. In the desert, flash floods can appear from nowhere, he said grimly. They reshape the entire landscape in minutes. A frantic pounding on the front door interrupted their observation. Magnolia hurried to answer it, finding young Timothy Brewster on her doorstep, soaked to the bone and wild-eyed with panic. "Miss Rosecrest," he gasped, "you have to come quick. The Patterson house, the creek's washing it away. Mrs. Patterson and the children are trapped inside." Magnolia's blood ran cold. The Patterson house sat closest to the creek, and with 6 children, the widow would never be able to evacuate them all before the building collapsed. "Get blankets and rope," Kestrel commanded, already reaching for his coat. "How many people are trying to help?" Timothy shook his head. "Nobody wants to go near the water. They say it's too dangerous, that we should wait for the flood to pass. Those children will be dead by then," Magnolia said fiercely, grabbing her heaviest cloak. "I'm coming with you." "No." Kestrel's voice brooked no argument. "The water is too dangerous. Those are my neighbors, my friends. I'm not staying safe while children die." She tied her cloak with determined fingers. "Besides, you'll need someone to help carry the little ones." Kestrel studied her face, seeing the steel beneath her genteel exterior. He nodded slowly. "Stay close to me. Do exactly as I say." They plunged into the tempest, fighting their way through wind that tried to knock them off their feet and rain that felt like tiny daggers. The short distance to the Patterson house felt like miles as they struggled through ankle-deep water that was rising. By the minute, the scene that greeted them was terrifying. The creek had jumped its banks and was surging around the small house, undermining the foundation. Through the windows, they could see Mrs. Patterson clutching her baby, while her other children huddled on furniture they dragged to the center of the room. "The front door's blocked," Kestrel shouted over the storm. "We'll have to go through the back." He waded into the swirling water without hesitation, his powerful frame cutting through the current that would have swept away a smaller man. Magnolia followed, gasping as the icy water reached her waist, fighting to keep her footing on the slippery creek bottom. They reached the back of the house just as part of the porch collapsed into the flood. Kestrel didn't pause. He grabbed a piece of the fallen timber and used it to smash through the kitchen window. "Mrs. Patterson," he called. "We're here to help." The next hour passed in a blur of heroic effort. Kestrel lifted each child through the broken window, passing them to Magnolia, who carried them one by one to higher ground. The 2 youngest couldn't swim, clinging to his neck in terror as he waded through the increasingly dangerous current. Baby Lily screamed throughout the entire rescue, her cries barely audible above the storm. Mrs. Patterson came last, and just as Kestrel lifted her through the window, they heard the ominous crack of timber. The house shuddered, then began to collapse into the raging water. "Move!" Kestrel roared, grabbing Magnolia's hand as they ran for safety. They made it to the mercantile's raised porch, just as the Patterson house gave a final groan and crumbled into the flood. Swept away like so much kindling, the Patterson family huddled together under blankets, shivering but alive. Mrs. Patterson wept as she clutched her children, looking up at Kestrel with tears streaming down her face. "You saved us," she whispered. "You risked your life for people who haven't been kind to you." Kestrel knelt beside the youngest Patterson boy, checking him for injuries with gentle hands. "Children should not suffer for their parents' fears," he said simply. "Word of..." The rescue spread through the town like wildfire. People who had crossed the street to avoid Kestrel now gathered to witness the bedraggled group, seeing him with new eyes. Here was the heartless savage who had risked everything to save a white family, while other men had deemed it too dangerous to try. Cornelius Whitmore pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with shame. I owe you an apology," he said stiffly. "What you did tonight, it was the act of a true hero. But Kestrel wasn't listening to the praise or the stammered apologies. His attention was fixed on Magnolia, who had stayed by his side through the entire ordeal, her courage never wavering despite the danger. As their eyes met across the crowded porch, he realized that somewhere between the fear and the rescue, between the storm and the saving, he had fallen completely, irreversibly. In love. The weeks following the flood brought an unexpected change to Millbrook Valley. Where once Kestrel had been met with suspicious stares and whispered slurs, now people nodded respectfully as he walked down Main Street. Children who had once hidden behind their mothers' skirts now waved shyly from doorways. The transformation wasn't complete. Some folks still crossed themselves when they saw him, but the blatant hostility had largely melted away like snow in spring. The tomahawk whistled through the air, embedding itself deep into the oak post mere inches from Cornelius Whitmore's trembling head. The stagecoach had barely stopped rolling when the towering Apache warrior leaped down, his coal-black eyes scanning the crowd of gawking settlers like a predator surveying prey. "That's him," someone whispered. "That's Kestrel Ironwolf." At 6'8", with shoulders broad as an ox yoke, Kestrel cut an imposing figure against the dusty backdrop of Millbrook Valley. His long black hair hung in intricate braids adorned with silver and turquoise, and traditional Apache markings decorated his bronze skin. The mail-order bride arrangement had brought him here from the Arizona Territory, but one look at the fear etched on every face told him this wasn't the welcome he'd imagined. Priscilla Fairweather, the schoolmarm who'd arranged the match through correspondence, stood frozen on the wooden sidewalk. Her delicate hands clutched a lace handkerchief as she took in his imposing presence. At 26, she'd grown tired of spinsterhood and had answered his advertisement seeking a wife. His letters had been eloquent, even poetic. But seeing him now, this mountain of a man who looked like he could snap her in half, terror seized her heart. I cannot," she stammered, backing away. "You're too savage, too heartless." The crowd murmured their agreement. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Men reached instinctively for their weapons. Even the horses seemed spooked by his presence. Kestrel's jaw tightened. He'd faced rejection before, but never had it cut so deep. These white settlers saw only his Apache blood, his size, his difference. They couldn't see past the surface to the man who read philosophy by candlelight, who wrote poetry about desert sunsets, who yearned for nothing more than a peaceful life with someone to love. "You judge what you do not know," he said, his voice a deep rumble that carried across the square. "But I will not force myself where I am not wanted." He turned to climb back onto the stagecoach, his broad shoulders sagging with the weight of another failed hope. The driver, eager to be rid of his intimidating passenger, was already reaching for the reins. That's when she stepped forward. Magnolia Rosecrest had been watching from the shadows of the Mercantile, her violet eyes taking in every detail of the scene. At 24, she ran the town's only boarding house since her father's death the previous winter. She'd seen enough cruelty and judgment in her life to recognize pain when she saw it, and despite his fearsome appearance, she saw something in this giant warrior that others had missed, a profound loneliness that mirrored her own. "Wait," she called out, her clear voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Every head turned toward her as she walked deliberately across the dusty street, her emerald dress rustling with each determined step. She ignored the shocked gasps and disapproving stares from the townspeople. Mrs. Abernathy, the preacher's wife, actually fanned herself as if she might faint. Kestrel paused with one foot on the stagecoach step, his dark eyes meeting hers with surprise. Up close, she could see the intelligence burning there, the wounded pride, the careful control he maintained over what must be tremendous anger. "You're coming with me," she said simply, extending her hand toward him. The words hung in the air like morning mist, shocking in their boldness. A proper lady didn't address strange men, especially not Apache warriors who'd just been publicly rejected. But Magnolia had never been one to follow society's narrow rules. Kestrel stared at her outstretched hand, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression, hope warring with caution. "You do not know me." "I know enough," she replied, her hand steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I know what it feels like to be alone." The boarding house kitchen fell silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the occasional crackle from the wood stove. Kestrel sat at the worn oak table, his massive frame dwarfing the simple chair as he cradled a steaming cup of coffee in his weathered hands. Magnolia bustled about, preparing a plate of cornbread and honey, keenly aware of his presence filling every corner of the room. "You shouldn't have done that," he said finally, his voice softer than she'd expected from such an intimidating man. "Your reputation will suffer." Magnolia set the plate before him with a gentle clatter. "My reputation survived burying 3 boarders who died of consumption, running a business as an unmarried woman, and telling Reverend Holbrook where he could shove his opinions about proper Christian behavior. I think it can weather offering hospitality to a stranger." A ghost of a smile played at the corners of Kestrel's mouth. "Magnolia Rosecrest," he said, testing her name like he was tasting wine. "The town remembers your father fondly. They say he was fair to all people, regardless of their blood. Papa always said a man's worth couldn't be measured by the color of his skin or the name of his tribe." She settled into the chair across from him, studying his face in the lamplight. The harsh angles looked less severe now, more human somehow. "He'd have liked you, I think." Kestrel took a careful bite of cornbread, and his eyes widened slightly. "This is ... very good. Different from Apache bread, but good." "Different doesn't mean worse," she said meaningfully. He looked up sharply, understanding her double meaning. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence, 2 souls recognizing kindred spirits across a vast cultural divide. "Why did you step forward?" he asked eventually. "You could have any man in this valley. The baker's son has been courting you for months," Magnolia snorted. "Cornelius Whitmore is about as exciting as day-old porridge. He'd have me pregnant and silent within a year, tending his children and pretending his opinions were my own." She traced a pattern on the wooden table with her finger. "I've been taking care of myself since Papa died. I'm not eager to hand that freedom over to just anyone." "And you think an Apache warrior would let you keep your independence?" There was something almost teasing in his tone. "I think you understand what it means to be judged for things you cannot control." She met his gaze directly. "Your letters to Miss Fairweather Cornelius showed them around town, trying to convince everyone you were dangerous." "But they were." "Beautiful, Kestrel, full of longing and intelligence. A heartless man doesn't write poetry about morning mist on mountain peaks." His dark eyes widened in surprise. "You read my correspondence?" Heat flooded her cheeks. Yes, I'm sorry. It was wrong of me, but I couldn't help myself. They were so different from what I expected." She stood abruptly, busying herself at the sink to hide her embarrassment. "I've never met anyone who could describe loneliness the way you did, like it was a living thing that followed you everywhere." Behind her, she heard the scrape of his chair. When she turned, he was standing much closer than propriety dictated. Close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, catch the scent of sage and leather that clung to his skin. "You know loneliness, too," he said, not a question but a statement of recognition. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Something electric passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words, deeper than the surface. Differences that separated their worlds. "The room at the top of the stairs is yours if you want it," she managed to say. "No expectations, no obligations, just ... stay, at least for a while." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand with surprising gentleness for such large fingers. "What will people say?" "People always find something to say," she replied, turning her palm up to meet his touch. "The question is whether we're brave enough to stop listening." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain. But inside the warm kitchen, with Kestrel's hand covering hers, Magnolia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope for a future she'd never dared imagine. 3 weeks had passed since Kestrel's arrival, and Millbrook Valley buzzed with scandal like a kicked hornet's nest. The morning sun slanted through the boarding house windows as Magnolia kneaded bread dough with perhaps more force than necessary, her ears burning from the whispers that had followed her to the mercantile earlier. "Living in sin," she muttered, mimicking Mrs. Abernathy's scandalized tone. As if sharing a roof with a decent man is somehow more sinful than Cornelius Whitmore watering down his milk or Judge Henderson taking bribes. The back door opened with its familiar creak, and Kestrel entered carrying an armload of firewood he'd split that morning. His presence filled the kitchen like sunlight, warming spaces she hadn't realized were cold. Over the past weeks they'd fallen into an easy routine. He maintained the property with skills that put the local handyman to shame, while she cooked meals that had him closing his eyes in appreciation with every bite. "The townspeople still watching the house?" he asked, stacking the wood neatly beside the stove. Like hawks circling a rabbit, she punched the dough harder than necessary. "Reverend Holbrook stopped by yesterday while you were hunting. Spent an hour lecturing me about the sanctity of Christian morals and the dangers of consorting with savages." Kestrel's hand stilled on the woodpile. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that if Christian morals produced men like him, I'd rather consort with savages." She looked up to find him staring at her with an expression of amazement. "Then I may have mentioned that his congregation might be interested to know about his weekly visits to the saloon girls in Copper Creek." Magnolia watched this gradual acceptance with mixed feelings as she worked in her garden behind the boarding house. She was genuinely happy that people were finally seeing Kestrel for who he truly was, but she couldn't help feeling protective of the special bond they'd shared when it was just the two of them against the world. "You're thinking too hard," Kestrel's voice came from behind her, warm with amusement. "The beans can feel your worry, they'll grow crooked." She looked up from her weeding to find him approaching with that loose-limbed stride that always made her pulse quicken. He'd been helping rebuild the Patterson house, and sawdust clung to his dark hair. Without thinking, she reached up to brush it away, then froze as she realized the intimate nature of the gesture. "I'm sorry, she began, but he caught her hand before she could pull it away. "Don't apologize," he said softly, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. "I like your touch." The simple admission sent heat spiraling through her belly. They'd been dancing around their attraction for weeks now, sharing meaningful glances and lingering touches, but neither had been brave enough to acknowledge what was growing between them. "Kestrel," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say. "I know." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I feel it too. What do we do about it?" The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and vulnerable. "That depends," he said, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Are you asking as the proper boarding house proprietress who cares about her reputation? Or as the brave woman who told the preacher where to shove his opinions?" Despite her racing heart, she laughed. "I think we both know which woman I'd rather be." "Good," he murmured, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. "Because I've been wanting to kiss you since the day you took my hand in the town square." "Then why haven't you?" she challenged, emboldened by his admission. "Because once I start, I'm not sure I'll be able to stop." His voice was rough with desire. "And you deserve better than a quick fumble in the garden." "Who says it would be quick?" The bold words slipped out before she could think, and she felt her face flame with embarrassment. I mean, he silenced her with his mouth, capturing her lips in a kiss that was everything she'd dreamed and more. He tasted like coffee and possibility, like the wild wind that swept across the desert. His lips were firm but gentle, coaxing, rather than demanding, and when she opened for him with a soft sigh, he groaned low in his throat. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Magnolia felt dizzy, like she'd been spinning in circles, and she gripped his shirt for balance. That was ... She began. Just the beginning, he finished, his eyes dark with promise. A throat cleared behind them, and they sprang apart to find Mrs. Patterson standing at the garden gate with a basket of fresh bread. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Magnolia caught the hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. I brought you some of my sourdough, the widow said, setting the basket on the garden table. It's the least I can do after everything you've both done for my family. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Patterson, Magnolia managed, trying to smooth her hair and compose herself. Please, call me Dorothy. I think we're well past formalities, don't you? She looked between them with knowing eyes. I hope you'll both be very happy together. Lord knows you've earned it after the courage you showed during the flood. After Dorothy left, Magnolia and Kestrel stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of public acknowledgment settling between them. She knows, Magnolia said unnecessarily. They all know, Kestrel replied. The question is what we're going to do about it. Magnolia straightened her shoulders, that familiar spark of defiance lighting her eyes. We're going to live our lives the way we choose to live them, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with the woman who watched you risk your life to save children. Kestrel's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. I love your fire, Magnolia Rosecrest. And I love, she stopped, the words catching in her throat. What do you love? He asked gently. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I love you, Kestrel Ironwolf. I love your strength and your gentleness, your poetry and your principles. I love the way you see beauty in desert sunsets and the way you make me feel like the bravest woman alive. For a moment, he just stared at her, and she worried she'd spoken too soon, revealed too much. Then he swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed with pure joy. I love you too, he said when he finally set her down. More than I ever thought possible. As they stood there in the garden, holding each other as the sun set behind the mountains, Magnolia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves as Magnolia stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her best dress for the third time. Tonight was the harvest festival, and for the first time in months, she and Kestrel would be appearing together as a couple before the entire town. The thought sent butterflies dancing in her stomach. Stop fidgeting, she told her reflection. You faced down floods and scandals. You can handle a church social. A soft knock at her door interrupted her pep talk. Magnolia, are you ready? She opened the door to find Kestrel waiting in the hallway, and her breath caught. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean waist. His long hair was pulled back in a neat queue, and someone, probably herself, had convinced him to trim his beard. He looked devastatingly handsome and utterly out of place. You clean up rather well, she said, attempting to lighten her own mood. As do you. His eyes swept over her appreciatively, taking in the deep blue dress that brought out her eyes and the way she'd arranged her. Auburn hair in an elegant updo. Though you're beautiful in anything. Heat crept up her neck at the compliment. Even after weeks of stolen kisses and growing intimacy, his ability to make her feel cherished with just a look still amazed her. They walked to the church hand in hand, and Magnolia felt the weight of curious stares following their progress. Some looks were friendly. The Pattersons waved enthusiastically, and several other families nodded their approval. But others held thinly veiled disapproval or outright hostility. "Remember what Dorothy Patterson said," Magnolia murmured as they approached the crowded church steps. "Half the town owes their lives to you after that flood. The other half are just jealous." The Harvest Festival was in full swing when they entered the decorated church hall. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade pies, roasted meats, and seasonal vegetables. Children ran between the adults' legs, their laughter echoing off the high ceiling. A fiddle player in the corner provided cheerful music that competed with the buzz of conversation. For a while, things went well. They sampled Mrs. Henderson's famous apple pie, admired the quilts displayed for the charity auction, and even managed polite conversation with several townspeople. Kestrel's natural intelligence and dry humor won over more than a few skeptics, and Magnolia began to relax. Then Mayor Blackstone approached, his face flushed with whiskey and his eyes sharp with malice. "Well, well," the portly politician said loudly enough to draw attention. "If it isn't our resident savage and his companion." The conversation around them began to die as people turned to watch. Magnolia felt Kestrel tense beside her, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "Mayor Blackstone," she said coolly, "how lovely to see you enjoying yourself." "Oh, I am enjoying myself," Blackstone slurred slightly. "It's quite entertaining, watching decent folks make fools of themselves over a few heroics. Though I suppose some people will do anything for attention." "That's enough," Kestrel said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Is it? Because I think the good people of Millbrook Valley deserve to know exactly what kind of man they're celebrating." Blackstone swayed slightly, emboldened by alcohol and the growing audience. "Tell them about the raid on Tucson, Apache. Tell them about the settlers who died." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Magnolia felt the blood drain from her face as she saw the accusation hit its mark. Kestrel's jaw tightened, and she could see the old pain flicker across his features. "I have never harmed innocent people," Kestrel said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent hall. "But I did fight to protect my people when soldiers came to destroy our homes." "Semantics," Blackstone spat. "You're all the same bloodthirsty savages who—" "Stop." Magnolia's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through Blackstone's drunken rant. She stepped forward, placing herself between the mayor and Kestrel, her small frame radiating fury. "How dare you? Miss Rosecrest, surely you can see— I can see a coward attacking a better man than he'll ever be," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I can see someone so threatened by genuine heroism that he has to tear it down with lies and prejudice." She turned to address the entire gathering, her chin raised defiantly. "This man risked his life to save the Patterson children when the rest of you deemed it too dangerous. He's worked without pay to rebuild homes damaged by the flood. He's shown more Christian charity than half the people in this room who claim to follow Jesus." "Magnolia, don't," Kestrel said softly, recognizing the dangerous fire in her eyes. "No, they need to hear this." She faced the crowd, her voice ringing with conviction. "You want to judge him for his blood, for battles fought before most of. You even came west? Fine, but judge yourselves first. Judge your own prejudices, your own cowardice, your own failures to live up to the principles you claim to hold dear." The hall was dead silent now, every eye fixed on the small woman taking on the entire town. Even the children had stopped playing, sensing the gravity of the moment. "If you can't see the man Kestrel truly is," she continued, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper that somehow carried to every corner, "then you don't deserve his protection, his friendship, or his presence in your community." She took Kestrel's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "We're leaving. And if any of you had any sense, you'd be begging him to stay." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, her head held high, Kestrel beside her. The crowd parted. Before them, like the Red Sea, too stunned to react. Only when they reached the doorway did someone finally speak. "Wait," called Dorothy Patterson, her voice clear and strong. "Please wait." The morning sun streamed through the boarding house windows as Magnolia packed the last of her belongings into a worn leather trunk. 3 days had passed since the harvest. Festival confrontation and the decision to leave Millbrook Valley had crystallized with surprising clarity. She and Kestrel would head west to California, where his carpentry skills and her business acumen could build them a new life far from the shadows of prejudice and small-town gossip. "The wagon will be here within the hour," Kestrel said from the doorway, though his eyes were troubled. "Are you certain about this?" Before she could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Voices, many of them, approaching the boarding house. Magnolia's heart sank, expecting another confrontation, but when she peered through the curtains, she gasped in surprise. Nearly half the town was gathered in her front yard, but they weren't carrying torches or wearing angry expressions. Instead, they looked sheepish, apologetic, almost desperate. Dorothy Patterson stood at the front of the group, holding a large wooden crate. "Please," Dorothy called out. "We know you're in there. We need to talk." Magnolia and Kestrel exchanged glances. After a moment, she squared her shoulders and opened. "The front door, Mrs. Patterson," she said carefully. "What's all this about?" "We came to apologize," Dorothy said simply. "All of us. And to ask no, to beg you both to stay." Old Henrik Johansson, the town's blacksmith, stepped forward, his weathered face creased with remorse. "What you said at the festival, miss. Rose crest ... It shamed us. Made us look hard at ourselves, and we didn't like what we saw. The mayor's been stirring up trouble since he arrived," added Mrs. Chun from the general store. "Most of us knew better, but we were too cowardly to speak up. We let fear make us forget our humanity." Cornelius Whitmore, looking thoroughly humbled, cleared his throat. "I was the worst of all. Too proud to admit I was wrong about you from the start, Kestrel. The truth is, I was jealous. Jealous of your strength, your character, the way Magnolia looked at you instead of me." More voices joined in, a chorus of confessions and apologies. The crowd included families whose homes Kestrel had helped to rebuild, children he'd carved toys for during his spare time, and even some who had never spoken to him directly but had witnessed his quiet acts of kindness throughout the town. "We took up a collection," Dorothy continued, gesturing to the crate she held. "Money for a proper wedding, if you'll have it. And Reverend Holbrook wanted to speak with you personally." The crowd parted, and the preacher stepped forward, his usually stern face etched with genuine remorse. "I owe you both a profound apology," Reverend Holbrook said, his voice heavy with shame. "I let prejudice poison my ministry, forgot that Christ himself was rejected by the very people he came to save. You showed us what true Christian virtue looks like while I spouted empty doctrine." He looked directly at Kestrel. Would you allow me to perform your wedding ceremony? It would be an honor I don't deserve." Magnolia felt tears prick her eyes as she looked out at the sea of faces that had once been closed to them, now open with hope and regret. But it was the expression on Kestrel's face that moved her most. The guarded wariness was melting away, replaced by something she'd rarely seen in his eyes: acceptance. "What do you think?" she asked him quietly. Kestrel was silent for a long moment, studying the crowd with those penetrating dark eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the yard with quiet authority. "I have lived my life being judged for the actions of others, for the circumstances of my birth, for things beyond my control," he said. But I have also learned that hatred breeds only more hatred, while forgiveness can plant seeds of understanding. He stepped forward, his massive frame somehow less intimidating now, more approachable. The Apache way teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but acting rightly despite fear. Today, you have all shown courage by admitting your mistakes. That means something. Young Timothy Brewster, the boy who had first brought news of the flood, pushed through the crowd. Does this mean you'll stay? Please say you'll stay. Who's going to teach me how to track deer if you leave? A ripple of laughter moved through the gathering, breaking some of the tension. Kestrel's mouth curved in the faintest smile as he looked down at the eager boy. I suppose someone needs to make sure you don't get lost in the woods again, he said solemnly. Then you'll stay? Dorothy asked, hope bright in her voice. Magnolia felt her heart swell as she watched Kestrel looking out at these people, his people. Now, truly. She thought of the letters he'd written describing his loneliness, his search for a place to belong. Perhaps that place had been here all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. We'll stay, she said, her voice carrying clear and strong. On one condition. The crowd held its breath. Mayor Blackstone issues a public apology, or we run him out of town on a rail. Her fierce expression softened into a grin. I've always wanted to try that. The laughter that erupted was genuine and warm, breaking the last of the barriers between them. People surged forward, not threateningly, but eagerly, wanting to shake Kestrel's hand, to hug Magnolia, to welcome them properly into the community they'd always been meant to be part of. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning with snow dusting the mountains, Magnolia Rosecrest became Magnolia Ironwolf in a ceremony that packed the little church to bursting. She wore her mother's ivory silk dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, while Kestrel stood resplendent in traditional Apache wedding attire, a striking compromise that honored both their heritages. As Reverend Holbrook pronounced them husband and wife, and Kestrel's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, the congregation erupted in cheers. Mayor Blackstone was notably absent, having been voted out of office the previous month and run out of town by popular demand. Later, at the reception held in the boarding house's main parlor, Magnolia found herself watching her new husband as he'd patiently taught Timothy Brewster and several other children how to carve small animals from wood. His large hands guided their smaller ones with infinite gentleness, and his deep voice rumbled with quiet laughter at their excited chatter. No regrets? Dorothy Patterson asked, appearing at Magnolia's elbow with a cup of hot cider. Magnolia smiled, her eyes never leaving Kestrel's face. Only that it took us so long to get here. Sometimes the best things are worth waiting for, Dorothy observed. And sometimes they're worth fighting for too. As if sensing her gaze, Kestrel looked up from the children and found her across the crowded room. The smile he gave her was soft, private, meant only for her, a look that promised a lifetime of shared mornings, quiet evenings, and love that had grown stronger for being tested. That night, as they lay in their marriage bed with moonlight streaming through the windows and snow falling softly outside, Magnolia traced patterns on Kestrel's bare chest and marveled at the journey that had brought them together. What are you thinking about? He asked, his voice drowsy with contentment. Your letters, she admitted. The ones you wrote to Miss Fairweather about loneliness following you everywhere. Do you still feel that way? He was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Then his arms tightened around her, pulling her closer against his warmth. No, he said simply. Now I'm followed by love instead. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled wild and free and no longer alone. In the boarding house that had become a home, Magnolia Ironwolf smiled and let herself drift toward sleep, knowing that sometimes the very best love stories begin with the simple courage to whisper, "You're coming with me."